All right, I hope your seatbelt's on. We have to jump into it today because I've got some things I want to share that might take more time than what I've got. But they're very exciting. You know, the other day I was kind of going out on a limb with an idea that had occurred that the practices, the sadhana of a bhakta or a devotional practitioner and one who's practicing the path of knowledge or self-inquiry, that they were actually the same. And someone who was listening to us talk about those things sent me a wonderful article from the centenary souvenir commemorating the advent of Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharishi. This is by Professor K. Swaminathan. And he makes that statement. He said, if Ramana Maharishi's teachings are correctly interpreted, then it will be seen that the paths of surrender and self-inquiry merge before realization, and that in the higher levels of practice, if one follows the path of surrender, which is the devotional practice, surrendering to the idea of God or to your beloved, which is your highest ideal of love, of existence, of intelligence. And if one follows the path of surrender, then one's sadhana, one's practice, will be the same as that of someone who has chosen the path of self-inquiry. And the path of self-inquiry is going inside through meditation and asking who's meditating. Who is it that wants to know these things? And the path of meditation or the path of self-inquiry is kind of nice because you don't have to believe anything up front. You don't have to have an existence of God. And for some reason in our culture and in our religious ideas in the West, belief is a really big deal. And I hereby give you full permission to just toss that out the car window right now. Belief has very little to do with spiritual life at all. And why do I say that? You know, because really what we're looking for is an attitude of, I don't know, really. I will never have enough information to say there is or isn't this or that out there. It's a big, giant universe. And so it's kind of like in the days when I'd go out, you know, hoping to find the love of my life, and you go out to the club or whatever. And if this is too much of a worldly example for you, just plug your ears for the next few minutes. You don't go out knowing that you're going to find your partner that night, knowing that you're going to find the love of your life that night, but you believe in the possibility enough to dowdy yourself up and to fix your hair and put on your best shirt and bother with the deodorant and go out to the club. And you may or may not, you know, have met that right person that night. But you had enough of an impetus to do a little bit of effort to make an investigation, and it either worked or it didn't work. And depending on how long you've been trying, you may or may not have given up after that one time. Really, in our relationship with finding out the truth of the beloved, the truth of our existence, the truth of what we are and who we are, that's all it takes. Just enough to be willing to put out the effort and to collect some information and take a chance. That's all that's required. There has to be no statements of faith and none of that. None of that. You build as you go. You grow as you learn, as you experience, as you see. And, you know, there have been many out before us who have had these experiences, who have seen these things, who had no real reason to lie to us about it. They were usually men and women who owned nothing, who had no organizations around them, no institutions around them, who were sitting on logs in the middle of woods and had no agenda whatsoever. So why? Why would they be interested in making up a falsification if, in fact, the thing that led them into that forest was the inquiry for truth? So that's what we're doing. That's where we're at. Now, this idea, we're going to talk today about some of the notions of surrender, what that means. And tomorrow, I haven't ever made a plan before for what I'm going to talk about tomorrow, but if the plan carries out, if it seems like it's going to work out that way, tomorrow we'll talk about the path of self-inquiry a little bit, just a touch like we do. So he says, in most cases, surrender is only a statement of intent, or at best, there is a partial surrendering to this new authority figure in the hope of acquiring some material or spiritual reward. You know, he's talking about, we have an idea of surrender. In the surrender, there's still an I who is surrendering. And the surrendering that we're talking about is getting rid of even that sense of I, of that person surrendering. The best way to think about it, really and truly, is the context of what surrender is. In a battle, when you've lost, and the enemy comes and gives you the terms of surrender, it's the enemy's terms, you know, it's their terms. You don't get to say, you know, well, I'd like a bigger chair and I'd like a better view. No, you've lost. You've already expended all of your effort. You've already given your best shot. You've already used up all of your ammunition, and now you've surrendered. You are just no requirements, laying down, doing the thing. He says, surrender him and abide by his will, whether he appears or vanishes. It doesn't even have to do with the existence of the other. The sense of surrender that we're looking for just erases the whole thing. It's a complete shutting down of the sense of I, the sense of being, not the sense of being, but you can't get rid of that. Hopefully you can find that. That's really what we're looking for. He says, leave everything to the divine. His burden, you no longer have any cares. It's God's problem. If you're taking the path of devotion, it's the beloved's trouble. Getting you to the goal is his problem. You've already done your best in life. You know that you can't possibly do it all the time. And now you're just laying it down and consciously, with awareness, putting everything in the hands of the divine. And what goes along with that is having no opinion or idea about what is supposed to be. So that means the good things that come to you in your life, the bad things that come to you in your life, you are equally content. You have made the decision, I'm surrendered. Whatever comes, I accept. And the wonderful thing about it is that this isn't a war as such, so it's not like the enemy is, we have to lay down and just, take our beating. This is the beloved. The nature of the underlying nature of existence, according to hundreds of the sages that have done this investigation and gone to the extremes that certainly I'm never going to approach, have said that the nature of all of this is love, that the nature of being is love, its intelligence. It's your very existence. It's not something outside of you. God is not on this side of your eyes. There is no this side of your eyes if you contemplate that and think about it. God is deep within. He is your existence. That's a wonderful way to get to that sense of being, which is where we're going, where we're hoping to do. He says, according to Ramana Maharishi, true surrender cannot be accomplished without complete desirelessness. Complete desirelessness. You have no requirements. You have no structure for what you're going to be willing to do and not willing to do. You're all in. you're just laying it down. It's getting to that point. Now, all of this is ideal. When we talk in spiritual life, we so often talk about ideals. You should always keep the ideal there. But then we can create what I would call a working ideal, where we sort of water it down a little bit and we get more realistic. It's like, okay, well, I can't do this with absolutely no desire. I have a desire to find out the truth. And so you say, okay, for my working ideal, I can have the desire to find out the truth. Now I know ultimately I have to give that up or I have to grow beyond that, but frankly, I'm not there. And so we make that adjustment. And those are perfectly fine in spiritual life. You can adjust it all the way down to right where you are and be fine with that, as long as you hold in your mind at the back somewhere that the ideal is higher and greater and bigger and transcendent and wonderful and beautiful beyond words. And hold on to that every now and then. And hopefully adjust your working ideal to be higher and higher as you go. He says it is the paradox of effort, which is inherent in nearly all forms of spiritual practice. Simply stated, the problem is that there is the perception that there is an individual self, the me, that's separate from everybody else, which wants to extinguish itself so that the state of realization will be revealed. But anything which this individual self tries to do to eliminate itself merely prolongs its own existence. You see where we're going with this? This is not something that happens in the mind. This is not a thought castle. This is not a set of relationships between objects and experiencer. This is transcendent. This is you. What he says here, he lines up the problem here. He says, what advantage is there in meditating for 10 hours a day if in the end that only has the result of establishing you a little more deeply in the conviction that it is you who are meditating? Okay? We're talking ideal again. But you see the weakness in it. You see where the magic's going to happen is when that switch happens, when that gets... we don't even have a word for it. It's not an experience. It's not something that's going to happen or do. It's an isness that is always present, that is not realized. An obvious thing that is not yet apparent, right? Okay, something like that. So he says, how to surrender, since the mere desire to surrender invents an illusory person who's going to surrender. The key to this problem, and the key to all problems connected with the practice of Ramana's teachings, is to bypass the mind and move to the realm of being. So we're trying to touch the sense of being without any adjectives, with no limiting adjuncts is the philosophical word for that, if that matters. But this idea of just being, what is it to be? I'm not being a man, I'm not being my age, I'm not being my nationality, I'm not being a receiver of information, just that being. In the direct words of Ramana Maharishi, who had the realization, who has, again, no word, understood these things, seen these things, experienced these things without having a me or an I and a mind to experience them. He experienced them. He says, it is enough that one surrenders oneself. Surrender is to give oneself up to the original cause of one's being. One's source is within oneself. Give yourself up to it. That means you should seek the source and merge into it. Now, these are words that aren't going to make any sense, if you haven't thought about them before, and even if you, frankly, I mean, I've been thinking about them for a couple of decades now, and I'm still scratching my head most regularly, trying to figure out, okay, I'm game, but I ain't got no idea. So we jump in, and the joy of spiritual life is this. It's the jumping in. It's the experimenting. It's the adjusting of the perspective always. And I don't know what that noise is in the background today. Good Lord, somebody's doing something in a playground or something. Anyway, he says, your duty is to be. Be. Okay? Now, being doesn't mean you just exist and pursue desires, or you exist and have all of your attractions and aversions. You're trying to go before those things. Those things do not, they don't define you. In the end, the final realization is you understand they had nothing to do with you at all. That they were just an odd collection of limitations and restrictions that you stomped your big old sense of I on and carried around needlessly with you for your whole life, defining yourself for it, I hate broccoli, and so by hating broccoli every time it's served, you're in misery. When in fact the guy next to you loves broccoli. Now, you both have a body, a human body with taste buds and a mind. How is it that he likes it and you dislike it? It's just an arbitrary choice you made somewhere along the way, and you chose to suffer for it. So don't. That's what he's saying. So you just have the duty to be, and to try and understand what that is, or to try have a full experience of that being, undefined. He says, your duty is to be, not to be this or that. I am that I am, which is exactly what the Christian God defined himself as in the Old Testament when Moses said, hey, who should I say sent me to ask for the Jews to be freed? And he says, I am that I am sent you. Tell him that. So very interesting. To me, that's interesting anyway. He says, the method is summed up in be still. Oh my God, there's another quote from the Old Testament. I think it's the book of Micah or Hosea or someone said exactly that. Be still and know that I am God. So here we get Ramana Maharishi saying this from a completely different tradition, incidentally, probably multi-thousands of years older, but saying the same thing. The stillness and the being which Ramana speaks coexist with each other and reveal themselves in their full radiance whenever interest in one's thought stream dries up. Now that's an interesting statement, because anytime all of us sit down to do our practice, to do our meditation, the first complaint, and I hear it all the time, I can't meditate. My mind goes everywhere. It's doing everything. Your mind is going everywhere, but you are standing there watching it. Pay attention to who is standing there watching it. Don't pay attention to the wandering mind. You have never moved. You have never been anywhere. You simply are. Wherever you go, you call it here, right? Whatever time it is, you call it now. So pay attention to the here and the now, the unchanging thing, the thing that is never different. That's what we're going for in this practice of devotion, this practice of surrender, getting rid of the ego, getting rid of the me and mine. So that's a mouthful, and I may have gone way over my attempt at staying to 10 minutes or less. But hang in there, and maybe tomorrow we'll get into the self-inquiry process, going back to some more words of the Ramana Maharishi. By the way, I will leave a copy of this down below in the comments or wherever you put that on YouTube, so that you can download this whole talk if you want and see what it has to say. Anyway, many blessings wherever you think they come from. May they be yours, and may you be full of life, enjoyment, love, caring, nurturing, and all that makes life valuable.